Afternoon, Salt Lake City. We are now moving on to our City Council work session for Tuesday, April 11th, 2023. Welcome to today's City Council meeting. We continue to host hybrid meetings to keep everyone healthy and safe. Our meetings are public, and you are welcome to join us in person on Zoom or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whatever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there's no public comment. Please join us on April 18th during our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. And we, of course, welcome your feedback anytime by mail to P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or by email at council.comments@slc.gov, or via our 24-hour phone comment line 801-535-7654. Written comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and posted on our website, slccouncil.com. A note about our April 18th meeting: it's going to be a in-person only meeting held on the west side at the Utah State Fair Park. So we are particularly focusing on west side related topics, and we're excited to have a second meeting in recent history in person on the west side. But there will not be a virtual, because of technology restriction, there will not be a virtual option for that meeting. So just be aware. We are now going to begin our work session, and the first agenda item is item 1, updates from the administration. Looks like Lindsay.
Hello, thank you
Hi,
for
Lindsay.
having us today. I believe that you have our slide deck, so we'll just wait for that to get up. Okay, perfect. We can hop on into the first slide if that's all right. Okay, so last week you heard a lot of great information from our Director of Public Utilities, Laura Briefer, on the spring spring runoff and flooding information. That's just the spring flood off. So all of that said, she shared a lot of great information, and that information was also shared with the public at a press conference yesterday, where the mayor and Laura talked about some of the preparations and differences between 1983 and 2023. The bottom line is that with the drought that we're in, plus the infrastructure updates that have been made since 83, we're in a really good position to respond to the needs of our city's residents, as well as mitigate any major flooding issues. So we feel good about it, but we want residents to know that if they feel like they want to prepare in any way, they can visit www.slcgov.gov/flood, and that's where they can find more information and resources. So a lot of great information on that page, and then some links out to the county flood page as well, which is really helpful. So they can find info on there about sandbagging and what they should be looking for at their home in regards to where to place those. So, and then we can go on to the next slide. Oh, yes.
Sure.
Yeah, Councilmember Pui.
Quick question. Sorry, I was
Of course.
eating a strawberry or whatever that was. I mentioned this the other day, and I would like to have maybe interact with the county flood control a little more about sandbagging.
Mm-hmm.
They have their sandbagging facility, if that's a thing, in Midvale, and which everybody's welcome to go if grab sandbags or make your own and whatnot. I'm wondering if there is a way of having some sandbagging places within Salt Lake City, and hopefully places near the river, or areas.
Yeah.
Maybe in my district and in Victoria's district, or well, I guess all of us have like some areas. I wonder if there is a way of creating some events with the county where this is closer to our neighbors, because while Midvale is not that far, it doesn't feel like it's the boonies, but sometimes it does when you have 2 or 3 jobs, right? And I would like to see if there is a way of creating some events with the county.
Yeah, great minds think alike. I think that our Public Utilities Department is already planning such an event with the county, and so we'll get you that information, and that will go out to the public, I think, in short order.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Happy to. All right. Fun slide. Just today, we announced Pothole Palooza, and all of you will be seeing this happening in your various districts. It's a citywide effort, intensive week-long effort to fill potholes throughout the city. The goal of our Public Services Department is to fill 6,000 potholes this week alone, which is a lot, but also not a lot when you consider that this winter has just done a lot to our streets, hasn't it? So, some stats at the bottom of this slide. Potholes filled in 2022 for the whole year were 17,000, almost 18,000 potholes. So far this year, and we're only in April, we've already filled beyond that, 1,000 beyond that. So the Public Services team has an all-hands-on-deck situation where all 60 employees are out there filling potholes. They've already filled over 1,000 since yesterday, so we expect to hit that goal. So if you see them out and about, give them a wave, but that's happening as well. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer. But potholes can be reported by the public. Oh, yes, Chair.
You were just answering a question I was going to
Yeah. If anyone from the public wants to report a pothole, there are a number of ways that they can do it. They can email our streets department. They can submit a request through the My SLC app. They can call the streets department, 801-535-2345, or they can even come into the building and report one. But a fun thing, I think it's fun, at slc.gov/mystreet, people can track the process or the progression of the week. So there's a map on there and you can see the potholes being filled throughout the city in almost real time. So
That's cool.
yeah.
I have a question. In past, when certain city departments and divisions have had like really big pushes for things, we've donated some food from the council office. Would they need some kind of, treats
I think
or
that is
cookies or
such a nice
something?
thought, and I bet that they would love that. So we're happy to help you
Love
facilitate
to
that
coordinate
if you'd
something
like.
like
Yeah.
that.
Maybe if you wanted to, you could go and tamp down a pothole or two
Ooh.
yourself if you cared to.
I would
Yeah.
like to.
Volunteer.
Let's do that.
I think they'd be happy to show you that. We were just out there today and everyone had the chance to do it if they wanted to. So yeah,
Oh,
We contact you to
love this.
I'm
volunteer.
happy to help put you in touch with the right people.
Let's go fill some potholes.
Let's
Yeah.
do it. I love it.
Awesome.
Mr.
Well,
Chair, Mr. Chair, I remember last year we talked about concrete versus pavement, and I remember a question from Councilmember Dugan that concrete, it's less. We can actually work with concrete more time through the year than less with pavement. There needs to be at certain temperatures and whatnot. And it seems to me that obviously concrete costs more, but it lasts longer and it breaks. It seems like it has less problems with potholes. I guess this is a general question. I mean, I'm throwing it out there. I'm not asking you for an answer right now,
course.
obviously, but I wonder if some of these major thoroughfares that seem to be, 2100 South or 600 North, that they have quite a bit of traffic and quite a bit of damage from this winter. I wonder if there is a plan to use nicer quality products like concrete and that will last longer and would require less maintenance. I don't know if there is a way of standardizing this or thinking about this. Maybe you're already thinking about it, and I want to know a little answer on that.
sure. I mean, our Public Services Department, there are a lot of layers when it comes to the streets and why they're paved the way that they are and why the specific method of repair is being chosen to extend the lifetime of the street. And so we would be happy to get you that information of the why of when they choose concrete versus asphalt. And because I'm sure that there's a great reason. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course. All right, we'll move on to our community outreach update.
Thanks. Okay, as always, for anyone who wants to complete surveys or submit feedback to the city, you can go to slc.gov/feedback. That's regularly updated with different ways to engage with the city. Next slide, please. First, an update from the council. Council staff has prepared the new fiscal year 24 budget landing page, which can be accessed at the link on the slide, as well as through the feedback page. Folks can visit the page to subscribe for email updates and to share their comments. Additionally, an update on the Ballpark Next design competition. Currently, we're conducting internal reviews of design competition applications and are finalizing the timeline for the public online voting window for the finalists. A public winners and themed celebration event is anticipated to happen at the end of May. This body and the public at large will be updated when both the voting and the event dates are confirmed. Next slide, please. An update from Public Lands. First, on the Glendale Regional Park, Phase 1A of the plan will add improvements on the west side of the site closest to the existing Glendale Park and include the playground, basketball court, picnic lawn, and connecting pathways. Phase 1A construction plan development is underway through summer 2023, with new amenities anticipated to open to the public in spring 2024. Phase 1B will start construction later this year and will be complete in late 2024, which includes the western half of the community plaza and parking lot improvements. Public engagement opportunities for Phase 2 will take place beginning summer of 2023. Additionally, an update on Miller Park. Public Lands closed a month-long survey in early March to assess community priorities for wall preservation and access projects. Public Lands is currently assessing and summarizing that data and will make the results available in early May. Next slide, please. An update from Sustainability on the Other Side Village. The Sustainability Department has been facilitating the environmental assessments for the tiny home village on city property at 180 West Indiana Avenue. They are working with the Utah Department of Environmental Quality regulators to develop a remedial action plan, which should be available this week for internal review, and then public comment. A public comment period is anticipated in late April or early May. Next slide, please. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, but these are just our upcoming dates for members of the public to engage with our community outreach team. If anyone wants to stop by and chat, you are more than welcome to. Lastly, one update that did not make it on the slides, and I apologize for that. I just wanted to highlight this for everyone, that the 45-day public comment period for Housing SLC, which is the city's new 5-year moderate income housing plan, that public comment period ends this Sunday, April 16th. So for anyone who would like to provide comment, please submit your comments to housingslc@slcgov.com by the end of the day on April 16th. And that plan can be viewed online at slc.gov/housingslc. That is it for me. Next slide.
One last slide. Andrew Johnston is not here today to give the homelessness update. So, but he did provide this information, which you'll see winter overflow utilization is down quite drastically. There is the rapid intervention and encampment impact mitigation schedule. And the next resource fair is April 14th at Pioneer Park, and Kayak Court, May 19th. Yay, Kayak Court. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so on April 14th, if you still have some clothes that you would like to donate, we'll be there collecting clothes, separating them and putting them, giving them out as well. But also we're going to put them together so that we can also give them to the resource center. So look for the District 4 booth and come for hot chocolate, coffee, and donuts as well. And talk to some of our neighbors, homeless neighbors. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, that's it for the administrative updates. Thank you for all that information. We're moving on to item number 2, which is an ordinance enacting temporary zoning regulations at 888 South 400 West. We have Nick Tarbett who will be giving us an introduction to this, and Andrew Johnson's not here. Is there anyone else from the administration that's going to present?
I think Andrew's online.
Oh, is he online? Okay.
Maybe.
Lindsay said he wasn't here, and I trust
He
Lindsay.
said he would be. I can give a brief introduction. I'm not sure there's much to say to this, Kimberly. Perhaps you can, when I get something wrong, you can correct me.
Sorry, Nick.
There's Andrew, the
I
voice. from
am
above.
online. You just don't want to see sick Andrew on the screen.
Okay. The brief intro, this is an ordinance the council can consider enacting a temporary zoning regulation for the Volunteers of America Youth Resource Center at approximately 888 South 400 West. There's already a temporary ordinance in place here. The request is to extend this until May 1st, 2023. That's the extent of the request, I believe.
All right, council members, do you have any questions on this?
Yeah, the May 1st is a Monday date. Otherwise, it was anticipated to expire on April 15th, but due to the real cold weather, they needed the extra time, and the request was to do it on Monday so that they could help get people back into services easier.
And this is for additional capacity at the Youth Resource Center on 9th South and 4th West.
Yes.
I'm supportive of this. I think that allowing them to operate through the weekend, have a few extra days. I have not heard, this is in my district, it's newly rezoned or redistricted into my district, and I have not heard any complaints about their increased capacity. I think from what I understand, they were able to serve more youth experiencing homelessness without even really an additional staffing need, and everything felt reportedly was orderly and went well. So I would actually encourage the VOA to consider, I think they're already considering applying for amendment to their conditional use permit, which would allow this to be a permanent thing so that they can, that great facility can serve more youth throughout the year, not just on an emergency basis. So I feel like this was a great test this winter to show that they were able to serve more clients without any negative impacts. So I would encourage that to become permanent.
So this is on for a limited formal action a little bit later this evening to formalize.
We must take action today for it to matter.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks, Nick. Andrew, did you want to add anything to that, or? I'm going to
No, it's fine. Thanks, y'all, for considering it.
Okay, great. Item number 3 on our agenda is funding allocations for the one-year action plan for community development block grant and other federal grants for fiscal year 2023 to 2024. This is a follow-up discussion to previous discussions. We have Ben Lutke, Council Policy Analyst, as well as Tony Milner, Dylan Hayes, and Heather Royale from Housing Stability here to help us work through this.
As always, if anyone needs copies of the funding log or the other handouts, we've got extras on the big table in the corner, and that goes for anyone in the audience too. I think we'll give council members a minute while they get their logs. Okay. We did get responses from the administration after the staff report was published. So those were forwarded to the council on Friday. I can bump that back up right now too. I just bumped up the email with responses to your questions from the administration, since it was sent after we published the staff report. There were funding shifts the council discussed at the last briefing. There were several in the public services category, but we could start with the housing and neighborhood improvements category. Some council members specifically discussed the Community Land Trust, also called the Shared Equity Program. It's on page 2 of the funding log, CDBG housing number 6. It's recommended for $406,000. So every applicant in the housing category and the one applicant in the neighborhood improvement category are all recommended to get more funding than they requested. We are not able to shift more funding into the public services category. So if the council wanted to shift funding away from number 6, it would need to stay in the housing category and or the neighborhood improvement category. There is a question of which of those applications could take on additional funding and the additional workload. I think additional time would be needed to check with each of the applicants for their ability to do that. But there are a couple of the applications that are from the Housing Stability Division such as the Small Business Facade Improvement Program. So I think the question, Mr. Chair, is the council interested in shifting some or all of the $406,000 away from housing number 6? If yes, are there particular applications you would want to shift it to? Or would you like the administration to go to each of the applicants, ask would they be able to take additional funding, and then come back to you in a follow-up briefing to say, here's the different feedback for each of the applications? The council is scheduled to take a vote next Tuesday on the funding allocations.
Council members? I'll say that we just talked about this during the RDA meeting, that the shared equity models are things that we want. I know that there's a discussion about, is it a good idea to have 2 community land trusts or just 1? And if so, where should it sit? And we need to continue to have that discussion. But in terms of this, I'm comfortable keeping the money in this area for now. Allow these activities continue as we have the larger discussion as to how to be most efficient with our community land trusts. But I think, for me, I'm okay with this, but is there anyone that is wanting to do what Ben suggested?
Mr. Chair,
Yep, Councilmember Fowler.
I just have a logistical question. Because these are federal dollars, if we allocate this money to this program now, it's not like we could come back later and be like, JK, we actually want to put it somewhere else. It has to go to where we allocate it at the beginning. Is that right?
I don't remember the council going back mid-year to change these allocations. I don't know what that process would look like.
Sure. I don't think that we haven't. My question is, federally, could we?
I don't
The
know.
answer to that is yes, through a substantial amendment, which would also take council action.
Maybe we could work with the Housing Division and the Attorney's Office to see if there's any opportunity to set things in a contingency until you decide if there are certain areas where you're not quite ready. I don't know if that would be possible, but.
Councilmember Fowler, something you're interested in?
Yes.
I would say that's a little bit more difficult because we have to submit an annual action plan to HUD by May
was what I was afraid
15th,
of.
and there has to be funding allocated to specific projects and activities by then. But we could certainly allocate it to a project or activity and then come back through a substantial amendment and make that change, but that would be up to the council.
I guess, okay, so brainstorming here out loud a little bit, and I apologize, but if we said, if you submit the action plan to HUD saying this money is going to go for this purpose, it's more of a purpose related, right? So if we came back later and said, you know what, we really think that the community land trust here in housing stability division, I'm going to get used to it one day maybe, is sort of this money and the purpose looks like it might fall more in line with some of the wealth generating and perpetual land stuff that we're doing over here. Could that be transferred without an amendment because it would still fall under the purpose for which we provided HUD with the action plan?
Yes, correct. That would not require a substantial amendment because you're not changing the scope of the activity itself. You're just changing who the delivery partner is.
Okay, so I guess, Mr. Chair, I would be comfortable leaving this here, but with sort of a legislative intent of coming back to this. All of the other programs are sort of already set in stone, or many of them are, right? We can allocate the money, go out and do this. This seems like still in that phase where we don't know what's going on with it. And so I would want like some sort of legislative intent that we come back and look at this before it's spent.
So, I think we've all been kind of wanting to have this discussion about what the community land trust is and how it works and how we can make it as successful as possible. Is that reasonable to happen soon? And
I would just,
For a budget?
I mean, it sort of is a budget discussion in some ways. Okay, I'll we can answer that offline, but I think for the purposes of this, knowing that we can allocate the money to the community land trust itself can be flexible in terms of what happens with it in the future, but I don't think there's anyone saying they do not want a community land trust anywhere. Is there? I certainly am not there. I want the community land trust. I want it to be stronger and bigger. So I would like to keep it in here.
I agree, and I think all of us want to see something happen there, and that's what we're talking about. So I think like revisiting this is important to me also. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
All right. Any more discussion on this item? Should we go to the next section?
yeah, so the other potential funding shifts the council discussed at the last briefing are all in the public services section. Councilmember Petro had a proposal that was discussed last time. I can review it. I didn't know if she wanted to speak to it first.
Thank you, Ben, for the hard work that you've done on codifying it. In the staff report, we did propose taking the 26,492 from Public Services number 2 and taking 22,892 from number 3 and adding it to those two, but it was only a 10,616 amount that we needed to take from the last. In here, it's proposed from the in-between, but Councilmember Mono suggested maybe that taking from the dental is more appropriate instead of taking away from the in-between. And also, I don't know if this is the correct time or place, but I'd like to propose that all of these amounts be restored with the dormant HUD funds that we have to use, if possible. I know there's some restrictions on them, but
My eyebrows were just raised. Can you speak to that?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I'm just concerned of taking it from the dental. The dental program, I mean, is used heavily. And when we went to Miami and discussed the homeless issues, dental work is so vital for the health of an individual. And when we allow their teeth to go bad, then their health and their food intake is impacted, and their overall quality of life is impacted by that need. So without having another place to get that funding, the dental impact will be hard on the homeless population. And I know there's a lot of dentists out there, but they already provide a lot of the services at this time, and they're actually like waiting rooms to get their dental done. So my concern is that taking it from the dental is not the right place.
I think that's true. The reason why I asked that we switch it from the in-between, though, is, again, these are all good programs. None of them are not important, but for me, I think I would prefer to provide end-of-life hospice care for this group. And if we take a little bit away from the dental, and the $55,000 proposed for donated dental is the most that has been proposed in the last 5 years. So we would still be funding it at nearly the same level that we have for the last 5 years. So it's not that we're not funding donated dental or saying that it's not important anymore, but I think that the in-between was one that we funded for several years. It didn't get funding.
it would take them down to 45, just under 45,000 as
which
well.
is the most
dental.
that they've received except for fiscal year 19 to 20.
And I just want to point out that the in-between did get funding from the state, and I don't want to, taking 5,000 from dental, it is important, but there was funding given, and if we kind of take, this is what we discussed at the last meeting, if we take a little bit from everywhere, then we get to fund a little bit more, and there, I don't want us to forget that the in-between did get funding from the state, and it's not like we're cutting all of their funding. We're still funding them.
Okay, but I still prefer to take it from number 9 rather than number 14.
May I follow up on what Councilmember Petro mentioned a moment ago, unless it was you, sorry, about restoring these dollar amounts using the HUD funds? Can I address that for a second so these guys understand? What they're talking about doing is setting aside some money to get where they have made these cuts, bring those programs back up, or where they, if they choose to make the cuts, bring those programs back up to the recommended level using the dormant HUD funds that have yet to be, I think we haven't yet received the recommendation on those yet. So there would have to be some, double checking of what can go where. But I think there's enough flexibility in that funding that if they chose to, they could do that. It would be a separate action that would take place when that is before the council.
Can I address that question?
Yes.
Unfortunately, because of the nature of those dormant program income funds and the way that they have been handled over the years, because administration and public services are hard tied to a program year, we've lost the ability to use those funds for either of those activities, either administration or public services. I wish that I had a better answer for you. But.
Does everyone understand that? I don't.
Cindy, I might have a helpful clarification.
I don't want to take the time if you guys don't need.
No, I would like to understand because I was looking for these funds for other housing priorities that I have. Thank you.
So my understanding is when we're talking about the HUD dormant funds, on attachment 4, we're talking about several different funding sources. I think the response you just gave was specific only to the 5.7 CDBG and the 8.6 million for home. On page 2 of attachment 4, there are 3 other funding sources that we've referred to as dormant program income, which are not restricted similarly as the other funds you just referenced. So I think it is possible to do what Councilmember Petro discussed, but it wouldn't be an option for every dormant fund.
That's right. I wasn't implying that it was an option for everything. I said we would have to look at the sources and the uses. So.
Yep. There is a path forward. So I think the question still stands about
whether we fund those 2 additional programs, and if so, where it comes from.
Correct.
And just to clarify, that's the Odyssey House number 7 and Salt Lake America, which is number 8. Okay.
And it would be funding both number 7 and number 8 at the $30,000 minimum. Yeah. So if, just to reiterate, if the council is comfortable shifting funds away from number 2 and number 3, both first step house applications, bringing both of those down to the $30,000 minimum, there would still need to be $10,616 shifted from somewhere else.
I mean, as Mr. Chair,
Yep.
as I mentioned in the previous meeting, I will be supportive of, and if there is consensus here, to find some middle ground here by maybe making up that difference with some general funding for the $10,000 difference, and see if we don't necessarily have to cut more, but we show the commitment from this city to these programs. So we shift some of the funds around, but then we make up the difference from the general fund.
Yeah, and so that would be in the general budget.
I would like to do a straw poll on that.
So does that mean we restore number 2 and 3 as well? Councilmember Wharton?
Thank you. I maybe it's just me because we've had this discussion over several different meetings, but we all know that these are very worthy causes, but the CDCIP board spends a lot of time going through all of the applications and weighing a bunch of factors, and I presume has had like a lot of in-depth conversations about that led to their recommendations. The areas that we're looking to shift funds to, can I hear, like, again, why we're, like, other than just blanketly saying that these are serving areas that are different, like a lot that can be said of a lot of these. Like, I guess I just want to hear more about why we feel like spreading the peanut butter is the better use of the funds, because maybe, you know, in some places you need the peanut butter to be a little thicker, or in other places not.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Fowler?
Thank you. As a proponent of, and sort of, I think, pushing and talking with Councilmember Petro about this, of at least number 7 is important to me because as the Odyssey House deals with a different population than the First Step House does necessarily. And I truly believe that we need to make mental health a priority among people who are struggling not only with mental health, but probably with substance abuse disorders. And as a full-time criminal defense attorney, I look at these programs and I look at the benefits that every single one of these programs are able to offer. And the more that we can have those programs to benefit different people instead of a particular population, but actually widen that population that can benefit, then there is a lot of good that comes out of this, including reduced recidivism, actually people getting the resources and the help that they need. And I don't think that 30,000 goes enough, but it will at least start and continue that program. This is a new application for the Odyssey House. But again, having worked very closely with them, having seen my clients go through their other programs and having a new sort of avenue for them, I think that this is incredibly, incredibly important, and something that we continue to talk about. When we went up on the Hill, we talked about all of these different response models, and one being how we're addressing mental health and people who need that very acute mental health resource to then get back on their feet. So I will die on my sword for this money because it is so important for our community.
I'll speak to number 6. The reason I advocated for that is that...
Number 8.
Thank you. Number 8, sorry. The reason I am advocating so passionately for this is that the Somali and Sudanese refugee population is predominantly located in the Jordan Meadows area. They were my neighbors when I was in the townhomes. And the efficiency with which someone from their own culture can access and help them gain access to the services needed, as opposed to funding someone else who might have to go in and build trust. This is money well spent. This is bang for our buck. This is investing in the people who literally speak the language of people who we have difficulty engaging from a systemic position. And I've been the small provider that looks like the people I was serving, and I gotta tell you, every time you gave me $1, I made it look like 10, and that's exactly what this kind of organization is poised to do for us.
Mr. Chair?
Yep, Councilmember Puig.
And I would like to talk a little bit about aid as well. Some of these organizations, and I think it goes back to what Councilmember Fowler mentioned, some of these organizations are struggling to find resources in other ways. And some of these organizations that we might be suggesting to make some cuts might have received funds from the state. And I know that the Salt Lake American, and they're struggling because they're narrow purpose. And many of these refugees live on the west side. I have a lot of neighbors too, and I hear from them how much they work, but they are facing a lot of barriers to find these resources. So I will be supportive of giving them the minimum.
Can I just
amount.
ask Ben one quick question before we continue? Is this the last item in CDBG that we need to sort through, or is there more in future sections?
This is the
Okay.
last set of funding shifts.
Okay, Councilmember Fowler, then Councilmember Petro.
Just a quick thing again on number 8. I have seen this panel here, the 7 of us, talk about, argue, get emotional about how access to applications may be a deterrent for people. We went through about 1 million discussions on phase 1 versus phase 2, or tranche this and tranche that, because we were afraid that people didn't have access simply to the application. And what we heard from the representative of this organization is essentially just that, right? That they're looking at how do we even get some of these monies, and whereas we have other people that are more sophisticated, have been through this process before, getting more of that access and more of that money. And so I think this is putting our money where our mouth is in saying what is equitable here, and I think it shows our commitment to all of the things that we actually have talked about.
It's almost like you're reading my mind, because my comment is that we talk about sustainability of these orgs, and the things that are sustainable are the things that we invest in. The number of times that large established organizations get marked down for their track record or sustainability, and then therefore get more funds, and other people who are trying to emerge into this space, especially like this person who is himself an immigrant, who is himself carrying the trauma of all the experiences that brought him here. Again, investing in this is developing a diversified nonprofit sector. It's developing resources that are customized and responsive to actual needs of a constituency that's not easily reached by systems. And it really is an amplification of every priority that we share socially and what we want our dollars to do.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Dugan.
I really appreciate what Chris is getting at here, is also that, we really need to look at the grading scale. These didn't do as well, but they were also new, and that sometimes happens, is that the newer programs don't do well as a grading scale because the application process probably wasn't as well done. But I'm also looking at, right now, I think there's a consensus that we want to fund these two. I'm all for it. We're now spending a lot of time on dividing $15,000, and I think $10,000, sorry, $10,000. So 5 from the in between, 5 from the dental, let's call it good, and move on.
Is that a straw poll?
That's my straw poll.
Councilmember Wharton, did you want to make a comment before we call that straw poll?
Well, only that, I think that Councilmember Fowler, Petro, and Hui all made really compelling points. I just want to make sure that, we're not, in trying to diversify the pool, that we're not diluting the impact, if that makes sense. Because, if you already have $30,000, at least in theory, I can think of, in my experience with nonprofits, I can think of experiences where if the difference between having 35,000 and 30,000, if you're already doing something, or you already have a program, like having an additional 5,000, you might be able to serve more people or do more good in that area than giving 5,000 to another. I guess there's something to be said for compounding of assets, and so I just want to be conscious of that. I don't know that any of these other programs that we're talking about, if they have received funds from other places. I think I understand the point about First Step House. We can look that there are a number of times that they appear on our applications where we know that they are receiving funding. So if we know that these other organizations are not, or if they're not receiving funding from the county or the state or whatever, if anybody knows that about any of these, then I would be curious to know that. But also, I think that I appreciate what Dan's saying, that if it is just a matter of $10,000, it might be easier to just do a one-time supplement from the general fund rather than taking money, trying to diversify the base, if that makes sense.
That would be a separate action in a different
Yes,
time,
I know.
right? We would need a budget amendment. So we have to balance this budget here regardless. And we have to figure out how to do that if we're going to fund these two now.
Correct.
In this action. So yeah, I think we all think, sure, let's use a little bit of general fund or fund balance to, I don't know that we all think that, but even if we do, we still have to balance this spreadsheet today.
Yep.
So Councilmember Dugan's straw poll was to take the 26 whatever from item number 2, the 22
It should be
whatever.
5,308 from dental, 5,308 from in between.
So number 2 goes down to 30,000, number 3 goes down to 30,000, and number 9 and 14 both reduced by $5,308, and we're funding numbers 7 and 8 at 30,000 each. Is everyone clear on the straw poll? Okay, show your feelings. That's 7 yeses, so that passes.
And then staff will track the 4 cuts, the 4 shifts, so that when the dormant funds come back, we'll keep those in mind if you want to fund those differences in the future.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can I also state a high preference to making sure that we use those dormant funds before we go into any general fund or fund balance for that? Thank you.
Noted. Great. So that is the end of item number 3. Thank you, Ben and Housing Stability staff. We did it. We are moving on to item number 4, which is item about our first issuance of the general obligation bond for parks, trails, and open space. This is very exciting. Ben is still with us from council. Policy staff, let's see, is Kristen here? We have Tom Millar from a planning manager in public lands. Kristen, I see in the audience, and Tyler Murdoch, maybe? Great. Oh, hi, Tyler. Ben, why don't you start us off?
All right, Mr. Chair. The proposal before the council is to spend $24.6 million for the first issuance of the Parks, Trails, and Open Space General Obligation Bond that voters approved last November. This would be 29% of the total $85 million that voters authorized. The remaining $60 million is expected to be split into 2 or 3 later issuances. This is done to ensure that the city is able to use the funds within a reasonable time, preferably 3 years or so. Once a general obligation bond is issued, it's typically paid back over 20 years. And because this is a GO bond, it's voters authorizing an additional dedicated property tax on themselves that is used specifically to pay back that GO bond. After the 20 years, once the bond is paid off, that dedicated property tax ends as well. The Public Lands Department has requested a straw poll from the council. If you support the project schedule that is proposed, there's a summary table in the staff report on pages 2 through 4. Note that some of the projects would be fully funded in this first issuance, particularly the playground replacement at Liberty Park. Most of the other projects would be partially funded, so some of this would be limited to public engagement, planning, and design, and construction would be in a later bond issuance. The council does have authority to modify any of the projects within the voter-authorized language. The ballot language that was approved is at the end of the staff report if you wanted to take a look at that. So if there's a project you wanted to change the scope, change the project itself, or the dollar amount, all of that is within your authority. Once the council is comfortable with the project schedule, the next step would be for the treasurer's office in the finance department to prepare a new transmittal and a bond parameters resolution. This would come to you in a new briefing, and the parameters resolution needs to be adopted by the council, which authorizes the sale of the bonds. Once the bonds are sold, then the final approval from the council is in a budget opening to accept the receipt of those bond funds and authorize the expenses for specific projects. There are several policy questions on page 5 of the staff report. I'll touch on a couple real quick. How should the neighborhood parks funding, with at least 1 in each council district, how should those funds be sequenced, since it's unlikely to be able to do 1 in each district at the same time?
Councilor Dugan.
My suggestion is that we pull out numbers out of the hat and go by that order. We all have a chance. We just pull the numbers really quick. Put
How
1 through
many-
7 in the hat, 1 through 7 in the hat, pick them out. That's the order they're done.
So Tom and Kristen, I think what Ben's saying makes sense. It's probably unreasonable for you to do meaningful engagement in 7 districts at the same time, but is it 1 at a time, or could you do 2? Like, what's reasonable? How many numbers are we pulling out of Dan's hat?
Yeah, we have an answer to that prepared.
Well, Tom will tell us how many.
The number really doesn't just depend on the other neighborhood park projects. It will depend on the status and how the remaining, few dozen projects of the entire bond go. At this point, our recommendation, which is in the transmittal, says the following. That the council districts with fewer or no other GO bond funded projects be prioritized to at least move beyond the design and engagement phase faster and into construction. Obviously, all of the projects would need to have some level of engagement and design done before we could have a clear vision of prioritization. And then, I guess conversely, that the districts that have the most projects funded by the bond or the greatest amount of bond funds dedicated to projects in those districts could be prioritized later in the I guess the overall project schedule for bond implementation. That way, we are spending at least as well as we can, roughly the same amount of money in each council district, sort of each year throughout the bond.
I
okay with
apologize for
that.
not reading the transmittal. I just read the staff report. I should have read the transmittal, but
That's fine.
that sounds like a good recommendation.
Council members, is anyone opposed to what Tom just recommended? As the council member with the most money in his district, are you opposed
Obviously,
to that?
I don't like it, but I think it makes a lot of sense.
I think one argument could be also that like your district really should be focusing on engagement on Glendale Park, and it might make sense for that to be where you're focusing, where we're focusing staff efforts, your efforts, community's
total
efforts,
sense.
and then we can work on the neighborhood parks.
I think the other argument to be made, though, is that Glendale Park is at the very southern tip of our west side. And the part of the west side that's feeling tremendous stress is that which borders both the River Trail and North Temple. And so the District 2 parks that have been chosen, which Madsen, the Peace Gardens, those are places for people who don't have a high likelihood of being able to travel down to the southern part or don't have 5 years to wait before they can enjoy the outdoors. And so we might have historic redlining rights and wrongs to attend to before necessarily completely equal distribution across the districts.
No, and I chose those parks because of that reason. But I also would like to ask a quick question, and maybe there is a different. And again, I understand what you suggested, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Is there any way to find out some of these parks when was the last time that this amount of money was invested? Maybe the historical piece to it, because maybe that is a way of also doing the same thing in a different way. So investing the money and starting the community engagement in the parks that were the least or the further away since they last saw a significant investment. And I don't know if we have that information.
Yeah, we do have that information. The second part of our recommendation is that the projects that came up in all of our discussions as very high priorities, regardless of the council district, may also be worthy neighborhood parks, trails, or open space projects to begin sooner than others. And those include parks like Madsen, parks like Toffer, that come up in almost every discussion that we have. And so there is, I think, a combination of not only geographic equity, but then investment equity as well. And I think a combination of those, as well as the information that we get as we tease out the next few months and year or so of engagement and design, would, I think, put us in a really good spot for laying out the schedule for all of those 12 to 14 projects.
And if I can just add that every project is important to someone, very important. And we get that, and that's why we have 2 planners dedicated to the bond. And we're going to try to work on all of the projects, and they'll take on a little bit of a life of their own. You know, every project has different issues and different challenges, and some will move quicker than others. But I know Tom and his team are really dedicated to try to get all these projects moving as quickly as possible. And, you know, he will focus on some of those areas that don't have any projects, but the other ones are also going to be in process as well at the same time.
I'm comfortable with hearing that and saying, great, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think I think your team has proven to connect with us a lot and to seek input, so I don't feel like I need a really strong legislative hand in this, saying you must do this first and then that. Is that okay, council members? Okay.
Thank you.
The 2 other policy questions I wanted to highlight are about combining smaller parks into a bigger park. This was brought up in previous conversations in 2 contexts. One is in District 3 for Warm Springs Park, which is on the southeastern side of the Wasatch Springs Historic Plunge Building, and North Gateway Park, which is on the other side of the building. That's actually where the Warms Spring itself is located. So the idea came up about combining them, which may require council approval, like an ordinance amendment or a lot line adjustment. The other context is in District 2, where creating the new Glendale Regional Park, and then across 1700 South, there's another existing park, combining those into one Glendale Park. Wanted to point that out since it likely would require council action if there is support for either. The other policy question is about the fleet block. Whether the council wanted to add a requirement that the bond funds only be spent on park space, or if you are comfortable having some more flexibility in not necessarily a park, but something else, whether it would be a plaza or another idea. Staff's recollection is the council had a preference for park space, but we wanted to highlight for you if you wanted to limit the bond funds one way or the other, it would be helpful to know. That's everything for my intro. I know Tom has a presentation with an overview about all of the proposed projects in the bond.
Thanks.
So on policy question number 4 with the fleet block space, it seems like this is delineating that there are 2 spaces. One is a park and one is a plaza. Is that a discussion that's happened?
No, the idea is to have one consolidated public space. If we call it a park, and if it's designed like a park, it does trigger some restrictions on adjacent land uses and alcohol sales specifically. If it's a plaza or a square or something that isn't like, a playground and grass, then it may not trigger those same laws. So as we pursue the community engagement and do some preliminary design and talk to artists, we anticipate that those types of questions will be asked and that those types of outcomes will
Okay,
come
so
out
yeah,
of
and I'm
that
familiar
process.
with that discussion. I personally don't want to limit the sale of alcohol in that area. It's like there's breweries that are already right there. I like that idea, but if we say we're going to go with the plaza route instead of the park route, does that mean your team cannot work on it, or your team can manage a plaza as well as it can manage a park, right?
We can
And
manage a
are
plaza.
we allowed
yes.
to plant things in a plaza?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's no real definition of a plaza at this
So
time
I
that
think
know of.
let's move
It'd be a
forward with
square,
flexibility.
too. Like this
Square,
is a
this
square,
is a square.
Uh-huh.
and it doesn't limit the sale of
Yes.
alcohol.
And we've been talking about it in terms of a public space.
Yes, there's a very uninspiring name in the transmittal for this
Fleet block
public
public
land.
space.
It's the public space at the fleet block.
We're not calling it a square or a park or any of that. That can be determined by public input.
Okay.
And and your input.
I do think access to green space is important for that community,
Absolutely.
but I also think allowing private enterprise to flourish is important. So I like where you're headed.
Okay. This is the most Leslie Knope moment I have ever had with the Parks Department.
Council members, any other policy questions you want to discuss right now? Okay. So what's the schedule on this?
And Tom does have a presentation if you would like to see that.
It'll probably answer the next dozen questions or so if I can.
Sorry,
it
Tom.
is-
we would
great.
love your presentation.
There it goes. There it goes. And some of the, we just developed a new style guide for the Public Lands Department. And so some of the formatting and fonts will be a little iffy on this presentation on the board. So the more formatted version is in the public materials that'll be shared afterward, but content's still the same. So basically, as Ben said, the request today is to discuss and to approve the first tranche of the GeoBond and the projects that it suggests. So this is the breakdown of that 24.6 million that Ben mentioned, which is 29% of the total bond funding. 19.6 will go to projects, and then about just a little bit over 5 million will go to contingency. I'll speak to how these break down and what we mean by contingency in projects in just a second. Slide. Thank you. This is how the 19.6 in projects will break down. The projects that you are all very familiar with. And I will talk specifically project by project, A through H, here after I share a map of how all of these projects fit throughout the city and where they're located. Slide. This is a map that we shared with the public in October and November when we were doing the voter information pamphlet and the public engagement. Numbers 1 and 2 are a little bit fuzzy because the reimagined neighborhood parks are sort of going everywhere, right? At least one in each council district. And then the Jordan River improvements are linear improvements that happen anywhere along that Jordan River corridor. Slide. So the $9 million, or about a third of the Glendale Park funding in this first tranche would go to completing phase 1A and 1B construction, as well as doing design for phase 2. Phase 2 construction would be funded in the second tranche. Slide. See, there we go. There's the formatting. It says Liberty Park Playground. Yes. What we're requesting is 100% of the funding that was decided to go to Liberty Park Playground. This would go from community engagement and design all the way into construction or reconstruction of that entire playground area, which is north of the basketball court and the bocce and horseshoes area. Slide. 850,000, or about 19% of the Allen Park funding from the bond, will go to develop the construction documents for projects that are identified in the now ongoing adaptive reuse and management plan, as well as construction of critical landscaping and utility projects that are currently being designed. Construction for those phase 1 projects that would be designed with this funding would be requested in the second tranche. Slide. Some tentatively good news has led us to request 100% of the Folsom Trail funding that was identified. That's all 5 million. This would sort of split into 2 projects. One would be landscaping the existing Folsom Trail between 500 West and 1000 West. And the second part of the project would be completing the Folsom Trail between 1000 West and the Jordan River Parkway, as well as the Fisher Mansion. Slide. Here's our very unsexy, intentionally vague title for this project so that nobody gets too emotionally attached to it. 10% is a pretty rough estimate that we use for design and engagement of projects. So we anticipate that this would go to the artists, designers, community engagement specialists that would help us to identify what the public wants in this public space at Fleet Block. And then the remaining $5,400,000 would go to construction of those improvements. Slide. All right, third to last. Fairmont Park, we are also requesting 10% for a very similar purpose, design, engagement, and especially stakeholder engagement, as we have a lot of stakeholders there on the north side of Fairmont Park where this project is focused, namely the Boys and Girls Club, the county with their recreation facility, and others that are interested in that site. Slide. The Reimagine neighborhood parks, trails, and open spaces that we discussed. These are 12 to 14 sites that were selected over the past few months. We're also requesting 10% to do very similar engagement and design around all of these. And I'll talk about the specific projects here in a second, but the criteria that we use to select these projects are myriad. I think I have at least a dozen here on my screen. These are parks, trails, or open spaces that are under-resourced and sometimes underutilized, that have had a lack of investment recently, as we just discussed. They have an opportunity to improve access and activation, an opportunity to reduce demand at larger parks, consistency with the Reimagine Neighborhood Parks goal in the Public Lands Master Plan or the Reimagine Nature Plan, as well as serving parks, trails, or open spaces that are in our 2019 needs assessments greater needs areas. We're also considering nearby population densities, levels of criminal activity and frequency of SLC mobile requests, opportunities to enhance already funded projects, the very, very good district maintenance supervisors and park rangers on the ground experience for what these sites need. And then lastly, and I think maybe most importantly, and this comes from the Public Lands Master Plan, in order to empower the surrounding communities by reflecting their natural, historical, cultural, and economic identities in high-quality park experiences. So with those criteria in mind, slide, these are the 12 to 14 sites that have been selected for this $10.5 million in funding. I say 12 to 14. There are 2 that would be implemented, funded, if there is funding left after the first 12 were developed.
I just wanted to interject real quick to say, in a few months, when the council is looking at CIP, you will notice some overlap between applications in CIP and this list. I think some of you are already aware of those, and sometimes that's good. You want to leverage multiple funding sources to have more funding for these projects. So I just wanted to highlight that for later this year.
Thank you. Slide these same parks just in alphabetical order, in case you're an alphabetical order kind of person. And then the last project in this $19.6 million of this first tranche is the Jordan River Corridor. The Jordan River Corridor is currently funded for, sorry. It's currently funded for what we're calling the Emerald Ribbon Master Plan. So we don't have any master planning or concept design funding requested as part of the first tranche. As soon as that Emerald Ribbon Master Plan is completed, we will do design of those most highly recommended projects or activities along the Jordan River Corridor, and that request would come through the second tranche. The reason why we're asking for $600,000 is that there's an immediate opportunity to invest bond funds along the Jordan River for an existing project, which is the Backman Community Open Space, in order to make that sort of the grand vision, all the bells and whistles that came out of the engagement and design process, rather than having to scale back and making it a little bit more of a lackluster project. This invests a little bit of the bond funds on those 2 blocks between 500 North and 700 North along the Jordan River Corridor. I I just have three slides left. This is a general overview, very tentative, first glance at project schedules, and you'll be able to see this in the transmittal as well. Again, this is highly subject to change as these projects are designed and implemented and as we do engagement, but we will definitely do an update of this schedule with each tranche request, if not more often. You'll see that the projects that are higher in the alphabetical order, A, B, C, D, are moving a little bit quicker in terms of implementation, and the projects a little bit lower may take longer or maybe later in this 7 to 8 year schedule. Slide. This is an overview of the contingency, a little bit over 5 million, or about 31% of the 16 million total in contingency bond funds. 3.3 million of this goes to project cost contingencies, about a 15% contingency, as well as the engineering division's consultant program management. Instead of hiring staff specifically for the bond projects, they would be having third-party consultants help with this, managed by that senior project manager that was requested earlier this year. In addition, 1.5% for art is requested in the contingency. This would not just go for the implementation of the art or the physical creation of the art, but to include artists in our engagement and design phases as well, which is very critical to not just have a pedestal that we put a piece of art on, but to have it be woven into all of the aspects of these public lands. And then lastly, about 1.4 million for the salaries, benefits, and operational costs for the 3 FTEs that were approved for general fund budget for the remainder of this fiscal year in order to pay them for the next 3 fiscal years to work on the first tranche of the bond. The last slide that I have is in case there are questions about operations and maintenance. We will know what the operations and maintenance budgets are likely to be once we're completed once we have completed the design phases of these projects, and then those requests would come to the council through the normal budget insight and an annual budget request process. The bigger requests for operations and maintenance funding are likely to come from also the bigger projects or the projects that are new assets. For example, Fleet Block is not a park right now, or is not a public space right now. See? Even I do it. Glendale is not a park right now. Allen Park is a park right now, but is not in the condition that it will be once the bond funds are implemented. So those are probably some of the bigger requests that you'll see, but again, we'll have more detailed information as those projects move along. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Tom. Council members, questions? Very excited to hear about this money getting spent. I think this is exciting, so thank you for your work on that. I have a question on the contingency. So $5.06 million, but of that, really 3.3 million is true contingency, like project overrun. Am I understanding that correctly? And the other 294,000 and 1.4 million are for specific things.
A little bit less than the 3.3 million is for actual overrun contingency. Okay. Some of that 3.3, but very little of it goes to the engineering division's consultant program manager.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. What's the first? The whole thing is 27?
24,660,000.
So of that 3.3 is what percentage of the?
About 12%.
12%. That feels maybe slightly light given current construction issues, but I suppose
it's about 17% of the project subtotal.
I see.
Yes, of the 19.6 that's just for projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
That feels maybe a little closer to
we had originally intended for it to be 20% contingency, sort of a flat rate.
Those your second and third, maybe fourth tranches could also deal with some fluctuations those will be more known at that point.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. That answers my question on contingency. Any other questions?
No, I just appreciate the hard work.
Ben, what's the schedule on this?
So the next step, if the council is comfortable with the project schedule as proposed today, a straw poll was requested. If you are comfortable, then there's no further action for the council until the finance department brings a bond parameters resolution to you. I think that would be in June, maybe July, and that would require the council to approve the resolution authorizing the sale of the bond.
Okay. I'll look for a straw poll. Council Member
Before
Valdemar?
that, I have a question, I'm sorry. Did you mention when you would think of, when you think about Pioneer Park, when we'll have more discussion about that, or I'm a little lost, sorry, I was.
Yeah, Pioneer Park is part of the sales tax
Sales-
bond.
okay.
Yeah, so it's not part of
That's
this,
right. Thank
this
you.
vote, yeah.
Sorry,
You
there
bet.
you go, so.
Okay, straw poll. Oh, Ben?
I was just going to say, in Budget Amendment 4 back in December, the council approved the $10 million for Pioneer Park from the sales tax bond. So the council's given its approval. That money is ready to be used.
What do we need a straw poll to say yay, go ahead?
Yes.
Yay, go ahead.
Okay. The straw poll is yay, go ahead. Does everyone understand the straw poll?
With this plan.
With this plan, with your plan.
This presentation, this plan.
Yes, and that's a legal definition. Yay, go ahead is a legal
Council
term.
members indicate where you are on the straw poll.
Yes.
That's 6 yeses, one absent. So yay, go ahead.
Thank you.
We're a little bit ahead of schedule. Does anyone need a break, or should we power through? Okay, let's do a quick 5-minute bathroom break, and then we'll be on to the convention tourism. Do we have everyone here that needs to be here for that?
I think so.
Okay, great. So we'll 5-minute break, and then we'll come back to item number 5.
I assume.
We are on item number 5, which is a resolution regarding a convention and tourism assessment area. Okay, we have at the table Jennifer Bruno, Council Deputy Director, and Mark White from Visit Salt Lake, and it looks like some other gentlemen as well. Jennifer, why don't you give us an introduction?
Yep, I'm going to give a brief introduction and then I'll let these gentlemen introduce themselves. The resolution that's before the council today enables a tool that several downtown Salt Lake City hotels and Visit Salt Lake advocated for and that the state legislature created in 2022. It's called the Convention and Tourism Assessment Area, CTAA. The council's role in this tool is a little bit tangential. It's essentially to consider this resolution, and once adopted, it would enable this organization, the CTAA, to enact a fee or a surcharge on hotels within the boundary in Salt Lake City. That map is outlined in the staff report, so you can see sort of where the hotels are located that would have this fee. It allows the county to contract with a third party. In this case, that third party would likely be Visit Salt Lake, which would then enact a 2% surcharge on all hotel room rentals within each of the boundaries as shown on the map. It doesn't affect any current city revenue for either the state, city, or county, and it's an additional charge that the hotels would enact and essentially manage themselves. This money would be overseen by a committee, which would be made up of hotel operators and, at their discretion, other key community stakeholders. The transmittal that's in your packet includes a very detailed management plan and budget projection of how that money would be collected and spent, but in general, it's for promotional activities and investments that would drive interest in visitation in Salt Lake County. So with that, I'll turn it over to these gentlemen.
You answered a lot of questions already. Thank you. As mentioned, I'm
Like
Mark
super
White.
close to your microphone.
Thank you. As mentioned, I'm Mark White. I work with Visit Salt Lake, and to my far right is Mark Mundell. Mark is the general manager of the Little America Hotel, and to my immediate right, Chris Erickson, who's the general manager of the Grand America Hotel and who serves on our board of directors. So, as mentioned, the CTAA we feel will put us in a more competitive position as we go out to pursue large conventions, trade shows, meetings, and sports events. When we compare our budget of $12 million to the cities that we compete against for that type of business, we're showing up at the gunslinging fight with a pocket knife. Our budget is $12 million. Most of the cities we compete against have budgets that range from 2 to 5 times that. We are funded primarily by a transient room tax that the county collects, and that total room tax, the total tax a guest pays, including that transient room tax, in Salt Lake is 13.82%. With this proposed 2% assessment, that takes us to 15.82%, which is the national average. We don't want to be above that, but we certainly don't want to be below that and leave potential promotional monies on the table. So these funds would be collected on a quarterly basis from all of the hotels in Salt Lake City. They would then be kept by Salt Lake County. We're setting up or attempting to set up these CTAAs in other parts of Salt Lake County. Then those funds are managed by Chris, Mark, and their counterparts. They determine how those funds are spent, and then we follow their directive. So I'll give just maybe 3 bucket-type examples. They could be used for marketing. We may create fund or a promotion that encourages a convention delegate to stay 1 day later after the convention. We may create bounce-back programs to lure those convention planners to come back, or those convention delegates to come back with their families. We could use those funds for sales purposes. For example, we may be pursuing a large, high-end convention that requires us to host their closing night reception the year before they come to Salt Lake. We may identify trade shows that we want to have a larger presence at as we go out and pursue conventions. And the third bucket would be, let's call it visitor enhancements. So during a large convention, we might want to use those funds to have some live music on street corners. We might want to increase our contribution to the Street Ambassador Program to make that more robust. But there's a wide range of what the hoteliers can choose to do, and I particularly like this because they're the ones deciding how those funds are spent. So hopefully that, and Chris might be able to add some context here. He came to us from Portland about 10 years ago, where they put together a CTAA, and it was it enhanced their marketing efforts significantly.
So thank you, Council. I'll make this very brief. I might say this is just a tried and true business model that puts another tool in our toolbox. Tens of cities and entities have used this model to enhance their budget. In Portland, basically, it doubled their budget in 1 year. And suddenly it propelled that city to be on the kind of a more elevated presence in the marketing arena. And I'm excited for it. This would be transformational for our industry.
Great. So, Jennifer, I have a question. I'm hearing a lot of different organizations. So this is money collected into the county, and the county has a bank account. Visit Salt Lake is what? I'm confused what the role of Visit Salt Lake is, and then what the private hotel operators that create this board, like how do all these different pieces work together?
Visit Salt Lake is a nonprofit organization that is based in the Salt Palace Convention Center, and we're tasked with attracting all types of visitors, leisure travelers, skiers, trade shows, conventions, meetings that might be self-contained at some of the larger hotels, sports events also. So we have our own dedicated funding source that comes from the county, that transient room tax. These funds that would be an assessment charged by all Salt Lake County. We're working toward creating these districts throughout Salt Lake County. Right now, we're focusing on the one just for Salt Lake City. But the county would collect those taxes, or that assessment. It would reside in its own account, but be overseen by a committee comprised of hoteliers.
So, and I'm not suggesting that this is this dynamic in Salt Lake City, but what are the mechanisms that keep in the most worst case scenario? I can see a city operating in a way that a bunch of money is collected from all hotels, and it goes to these 4 different people that happen to land themselves on this board to enhance their specific hotel. What are the guardrails on this?
I think it's going to be the size of the board and the diversification of the board. So owners, operators, hotel managers would comprise of the board, and the board is basically, I don't know if it's slated to be more than 10 or 12 or 13. It depends on each community.
Between 3 and 9.
So one portion of the monies would be obviously B2B, business to business. We would be trying to attract people with lanyards to our city and basically gain market share from, say, Portland or Sacramento or Austin. And Mark, I don't know if you have any other comments.
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to speak here. I think the diversity of the CTAA board would be the dynamic there. So Guy Woodbury is familiar in this industry, has about 20 hotels represented on a limited service fashion. We have a brand new Hyatt downtown, which we would love to fill up and make our city prosperous. We have Little America and Grand America on the outskirts. So the idea of this funding is, and the same idea from the CVB is, the more people we get into Salt Lake City, rises the tide and everybody's successful. So the funds would be, protected by the unanimous decision of the board. I think there'll be a lot of different entities there that would help make sure that those right decisions are made. We're not going to go out and buy something foolish that we know that the return on the investment in our tourism tax dollars is significant, and we feel like if we had more to work with, we would all of a sudden be a competitor to that Portland city that has 2 times or 3 times more money than we have.
So I guess my vote would count no more than the Hyatt Places vote. So I don't know if that's the heart of your question.
I think maybe just from a governance perspective, I don't know if that's the angle you're coming from, but there is a clause in the legislation that allows the county council so the county has the responsibility to renew the contract after 5 years. And so in theory, if the county council, didn't approve of the way the board was spending funds, they could decline to renew it. The other aspect in the law allows lodging establishments to sign a petition if there's more than 60% of lodging establishments that essentially protest how things are going. The county can consider that and dissolve the CTAA. So I think maybe to get to sort of the heart of like a governance thing, maybe the county council, I guess, would be the final oversight body.
And remind us what our role as a city council is. You said it's tangential.
It's very unusual. I'll just admit that. This is a tool that I haven't seen in our state legislature, but it's essentially to adopt a resolution to grant the CTAA the authority to charge this fee or surcharge on hotels within that boundary, within the specific CTAA boundary. So not even all hotels within Salt Lake City, it's just within that boundary. And it was just a part of the legislation, so.
It's kind of like an SAA, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
it sounds like it. So it's in addition to whatever.
It is, although the difference, I think, is that the SAA is very much public and governed by a public elected officials, whereas this is not. So it is a little different.
Yeah.
But it's businesses charging themselves. And so I think that's probably why the legislature ended up having it be processed this way and not like an SAA.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilmember Dugan.
Just on so 2%, and it's the map we have here is it's specific. There's I'm not sure what the eastern border is or the southern border is. The map gets fuzzy when you kind of explode it for Salt Lake City. But besides that, so a 2% surcharge. What's the ROI on the sales tax for this the city? What should we see as far as increased sales tax in downtown businesses because of the increase of visitors coming to Salt Lake City and the increased hotel occupancy? Is there an idea or is there a ballpark number?
That is an exceptional question, but a very difficult one to answer. Much of the business that we're pursuing is far, far into the future. We're talking to some of these convention planners about bringing business in 2029 and 2023 or 2031, and so it's a tough one to answer. I know that sounds vague and elusive, and I certainly don't mean it to be that way, but part of the strategy is to ensure that we don't lose market share as well, as so many of these other 200 large cities have something in place that enables them to pursue business a little more effectively than we do.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions lined up. Councilmember Petro, Councilmember Pui, and then Councilmember Valdemoros.
I would love that quantification to be an early project. I know as business people, you all can keep a track of everything, and knowing that quickly would be really important to me. Secondarily, we talked about diversification a lot. Do we have any quotas or anything that would ensure that we have even basic gender diversity on this? Or, I mean, I would love ethnic and racial diversity, but and then the final question would be about geographic diversity. Right now, we're starting in a pretty downtown-centric way, but we have some really amazing developments coming, particularly along the North Temple corridor, and the ability, if this proves successful, to expand there would be something, especially if we can restrict reinvestment to areas that are driving this sort of thing. You know, the Fair Park Master Plan calls for just some tremendous developments, and they were just made an authority so they could act on those quickly. Being able to enact something like this on North Temple in particular would be exciting.
To my understanding, there is not nothing formal in the management plan that mandates a diverse board, but there is certainly wisdom in doing so. Each of the hotels that pays into or collects the assessment has an opportunity to serve on that board, and.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the governance, as you said, has not been officially set up, but I'm wide open to your recommendations, and I
Is your
appreciate
industry one that suffers from the need to diversify your leadership? Or do you have lots of industries, most industries have a leadership scheme where people from historically marginalized communities or women have not been afforded the luxury of getting to those positions? Is your industry one that suffers similarly from that?
No, I don't
Okay,
believe
so
so.
you should have, you should have, you should have a pool then to draw from. It's not like being.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Our
perfect.
CEO is a female.
Perfect.
Female
Love
runs
that.
the Hyatt Regency. She extends her condolences for not being able to make it. She's out of town today. Most of our clients, convention planners, are female, and so we recognize the wisdom for so many reasons to have some diversification. Yeah, thank you.
And then the geographic portion.
To some degree, that answers itself because it's all of the hotels within that geographical area. So as more hotels are built in, let's say, toward the Fair Park, there would be more opportunities for those new hoteliers to serve on that committee.
Okay, even though it's outside, it's 84116 and 84104, and I don't see those represented on the map.
I think when I raised the question, I think the response was that it could be included as part of a renewal because the boundaries are established in resolution. And so kind of like an SAA is a specific boundary, there would be a formal process to change that boundary. But it sounded like they're very open to changing that boundary in the future.
So, Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Puig.
So I'm familiar with, from my time at the county, with Business Salt Lake, and many of their board members are a good friend of mine, and I know that the work that Business Salt Lake does is incredible. And this is about creating a funding source from tourist money, so not our residents, to actually bring more resources and conventions, meaning, people buying food in our streets and, in our local restaurants and spending their money here. So which is something that we really want to happen. I want the Salt Lake, Salt Palace full all the time. Not only that venue, there's other venues too, but let's fill them up. And I mean, there's a county venue and we should, for sure prioritize there. And I love that. Now, when thinking about this, I remember something that I struggle with, and not on your project, but in general. When I was talking to a scary house, how do you call those? The haunted house.
Haunted
Scary
house.
You get it.
Okay.
They were telling me that they're on the same sort of line of work, right? They're trying to get these large groups to come visit their haunted house, and there's a market for that apparently, and they are partnering with hotels to bring these large groups. Apparently, there is large groups of people that travel across the country to visit haunted houses. I didn't know that until very recently. But one of the incentives when they're building these packages is to tell them, you get a little discount at this restaurant, you can build a packet with these amenities. And something I noticed in this when talking to them is none of their options were outside downtown, which, I struggle with the idea because there is amazing food in my district, probably some of the best food. Close after it follows District 1. No, there is fantastic food beyond, diverse food from, diverse vendors. And I, they didn't thought about it when I told them. It's like there is literally walking distance from your location, there is, an immigrant restaurant that is fantastic. And it's so I'm okay with this mechanism in general because, it's tourism money funding more tourism for Salt Lake City. I want you guys to think about these other, local businesses beyond the downtown area. And I know that you are affiliated with some restaurants yourself, right? And you probably want to prioritize those. But I do want you to think outside that because there is a lot to be done. And you talk about lifting all the votes, right? And it's not only lifting the votes in downtown, it's lifting all the votes in my district too and in other parts of the city.
Thank you, Councilmember Puig. Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you. I'm excited that the businesses want to do this. So of course, the more the merrier that come to downtown and spend their money in our businesses here. I just wanted to understand what services do they get for this 2%?
pay a tax, just like every other city.
No, I understand, but the business, like, what am I getting? Like, if I owned a hotel, like, and I paid into this 2%, what am I getting in return? Because I am already assessed by the CBD,
Right.
I'm already assessed by the city, like another different, so what do I get?
Well, again, it's a pass-through, so the business isn't actually taxed on that either. It's taxed on to the client, to the person who's staying in the hotel. So every guest who stays at a hotel will be assessed a 2% tax or assessment. So it's really there's nothing that the business would be reliable for other than to secure that tax money and pass it on to.
So, if I may, I think what you're saying is we would elevate our brand. Maybe I'm going to get
Okay,
to
yeah,
that.
that's what I
Yes.
wanted to
So
get, like,
the
what-
brand of Salt Lake,
Okay.
and for that matter, Utah, in kind of a weird sort of way, would be elevated. And when my gentleman to the left of me is at a conference with 300 other cities, we could have a bigger booth, a bigger presence. We could compete on a more national stage than perhaps we are now. I don't know if that's in simplistic terms.
Right, so that's good, but then I think I saw something in the presentation or you said something about, well, maybe we can help with the ambassador program,
Yes.
or maybe we can help with, so that's what I was trying to get to, like what else, like here in Salt Lake City, do we get? What does District
Yes.
4 get?
So clients may have specific needs. They may want greeters at the airport. They may want safe and clean streets. I think we all want that. But we could, at times, if we choose so, Mark, if I'm getting this wrong, but at times we can choose to elevate the financial expenses and pay for more ambassadors at the airport, or pay for more safe and clean streets, as an example. Or maybe it's music or in Pioneer Park for all to enjoy, not necessarily a gated thing. But Mark, what's your thoughts on that?
Well,
I'm thinking
agreed.
Main Street right now.
Yeah.
Main Street,
Right,
Main
Main
Street
There
and
are things we
activation.
can do, such as create packages that are built around the auto show at the Fair Park. It includes a hotel stay. It includes discount passes to some of the restaurants. There's a lot we can do to create more business and to enhance the experience that the people have, thus increasing their likelihood to return.
And I think we want ROI too. So if I may, the two gentlemen right behind me are in charge of marketing and also the finances piece. And we will demand a return on the investment. So what are the restaurant receipts like? What are the sales like in the city? We want to look at that data and learn from the data and what works effectively.
And I think ultimately it comes down to, heads and beds. I think the goal is getting close to 800,000 guest rooms booked in the year for all
900,000.
future years in an annual year. We want to see that number be 1 million people, a million hotel rooms sold annually that would be spread out through the county. So not unlike an outdoor retail event back in the day where every single hotel from Provo to Ogden was full and everybody gained from that. But the more specific question, I think, is there will be a pool of money that we could do collectively for the city and the county, but most of it will probably go down to what a planner would need to make their event successful in Salt Lake City, and how can we help them get here? How can we? What's the final carrot to get them to land the business to come here? To choosing, if you're choosing between San Antonio and Denver and Seattle, they have funds that will be able to say, hey, we can spend $50,000 for a welcome reception for you and your group. We would love to do that. We could put some ambassadors at the airport for you to make you feel welcome. We don't have those tools in our tool shed right now. So that's really what I think probably the most important thing is what does the meeting planner need to end up booking the piece of business with Salt Lake City?
Councilmember Pui.
Mr. Chair, so quick question, and maybe I missed this because, my brain scatters sometimes. I noticed in the map there's other two CTAA areas. Do the funds collected in one of the CTAA areas transfer within CTA, so they stay within, right? So Salt Lake City money, like the 2% that rooms here in Salt Lake City within this area will stay to attract conventions or events to Salt Lake City, not to talk about Sandy, but
Yes.
I don't want them to go to Sandy. I want them to stay here.
Kind of mixes.
Yeah. We are going through this, maybe a long answer to your short question. What we would love to see eventually is to have every hotel be part of this countywide. It's turning out to be a heavy lift. So we're focusing on Salt Lake, which is where most of our hospitality product is, most of the hotels, most of the restaurants, and so on. That's where we can move the needle in the most significant way. We're going through this process also with the south part of the valley, Sandy and some of the municipalities around there, and then the same in the West Valley, where there are relatively few hotels, but nonetheless, there are opportunities for that. So the funds that are collected overall, there will be some promotions that just naturally lift all the boats. We're not going to run ads that say, come to Salt Lake, but don't go anywhere else. So it does raise all boats to a degree, but the intent is that the funds raised here benefit the hotels and the businesses that are here. And then the same with Sandy and their funds.
It's our understanding that the county treasurer will be part of ensuring that those funds are separated, because they're the ones that are actually receiving the receipts from specific hotels and are tracking
So
them.
Sandy will have its own funding, West Valley will have its own funding,
I-
and own CTAA to decide what they want to do with the money as well.
And their own
Their own
committees,
committee.
correct.
So I think we're asking a lot of hard questions for something that we're tangentially
Right.
in charge of, but I think I want to.
Just trust us, it's going to be great.
No, actually, that's exactly the concern,
Yeah.
to be honest. And I don't want this to come off at all like
Yeah.
whatever, but I run a small business. I run a very small architecture firm. This sounds to me like, oh, there's this great new tool, and we're going to tax every architecture project 2%, and then that's going to go into this fund that representatives of the 5 biggest architecture firms are going to choose how to spend the money that that was collected on my clients. Do you understand? Like, if I'm a small bed and breakfast operator that does not rely on conventions, why would I be excited about my guests paying an extra 2% and that money being spent by this organization of people that like I'm not represented on, and I don't even know how to get on or didn't even know existed?
Yeah. Well, I'll attempt to answer that. Every time we bring in a large event, whether it's a 30,000 person volleyball event or a 10,000 person convention, that tide does lift all boats, and it creates compression outward. Now, many of them may be staying at the hotels that these gentlemen run, but the other guests that are, let's say, displaced or that still want to come to Salt Lake need to go somewhere. So those occupancy rates at those other hotels, those other bed and breakfasts do go up. So part of this process required us to go and meet with the hoteliers to have them sign petitions indicating they're in favor of this. So the fact that every hotel that we've spoken to, except one, the Metropolitan Inn, which is on West Temple and approximately 500 South, every one of those is in favor. There are some that have given us a verbal in favor, but we're still waiting for their ownership's signature. But we have signatures on those petitions representing approximately 85% of the hotel room inventory. So even the smaller hotels see value in that rising tide concept.
I would also add that, if I would, I've been in this industry for 35 years in the hotel and hospitality industry, and I have never been in front of any kind of committee or legislation and asking to raise hotel occupancy tax. I always felt like you had to have the right mechanism in place and have things in the right way to make sure that we're going to charge 2% more to all of our customers. We do not want to be in an unfavorable position against anybody in our markets or next door or in the world. We feel, and I think collectively as a hotel association, as Mark just pointed out, that we are well behind the curve on marketing and tourism funding for a city and county as big as Salt Lake. And we need to do something. So this is a vehicle that will help us get there. And I think there is nearly 100% approval of us moving forward. And I think there's some really smart, quality people in this county if we put them together, we can make good things happen. So it's a first for me. I'm not sure if it's a first for, well, you were already in Portland, but.
Jennifer, what is the process for this then? What are our council actions? Can you
So
remind us?
if the council is okay with the tool going forward, the resolution would go on your next formal meeting for considered adoption. And then it would start a 30-day clock where the sort of protest rate would be officially recorded with the county, and then collections would start potentially as early as July.
So when do we adopt the resolution?
You could adopt it at any point. Next week would be, I think, what
At a formal?
they're hoping
okay.
for, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Okay, Councilmember Valderos had a question, and then
Right.
let's do one more.
So I'm excited about this, especially if you have almost 100% of the people that you talk to in favor of this. And so would it be safe to say, as Salt Lake City looks at our budget as well and how much money we spend on the CBD and we spend on ambassadors and we spend on our public safety and different alternative response models that we're trying to do, would it be safe to say that we could reach out to you with a request? Maybe we do have a bigger event coming downtown where we find ourselves somewhat short, and we would have to, we would like to ask you, some of those funds that you're collected, we need so that we can benefit as well your business, et cetera. I mean, I'm just trying to encourage you or ask you that you have that open line of communications with us as we work together, because some things overlap that we already do, but sometimes we don't have enough, and we have bigger events, and we're struggling to find where in our budget can we cover for this. But I think you have this, this revenue source that we don't have right now, and you can definitely help us. And help you, basically.
Very, very much so. Let's talk about the NBA All-Star Game that was just here. I know the city contributed in a large sort of way.
Right, $1 million.
As did we, commensurate with our existing budget. But those large events are exactly the types of things that we could pursue. Now, the NBA All-Star Game doesn't come back every year, but the intent is to pursue those types of things and to have the funds that enable us to do some of those activations that need to be done. So the answer is yes.
Okay, Councilmember Fowler, then Councilmember Petro, and then we're going to move on to the next agenda item.
I just want to quickly say thank you. I think this is a great idea, honestly. It's the visitors paying, and we want them to not only pay, but come and spend money in our city. And to Councilmember Pui's point earlier, we want all of these hotels, from the boutique hotel at Monaco to the bed and breakfasts to the convention hotel, full every weekend with people in our streets. And so, I think that to your point, you're absolutely right. We are sort of behind the line. We're fine, but at the same time, I feel like we're finally a big kid city,
Yes. Yeah.
and we need to go play with the big kids now, and show everyone that Salt Lake City is not boring. It's amazing, right?
Well said.
I kept my profanity to myself.
Thanks, Councilmember Petro.
I know that in programs like this in other places, it's common to have an earmark for arts-specific programming and promotion. And I have to say, as someone who came from it, our arts and entertainment sector here is the most under-promoted but most vibrant part of what we do. And I would really love to see any sort of earmarking like that as part of the ultimate plan.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for answering all our
Thank you
questions.
for your time.
We are moving on to item number 6, which is an informational agenda item. It is discussion of options for the council's routine oversight audits follow-up discussion. And Jennifer Bruno is going to lead us in this discussion.
I don't know about lead,
Okay,
but
gonna introduce the
maybe I
discussion.
can recap where we ended the last discussion, which is the council has an annual appropriation to conduct in the council's role sort of legislative oversight audits. We have on contract 3 firms that are well-versed in the operations of cities from all departments' perspectives. And so it was basically an intent to just resurrect that idea. And since the council's initial discussion in December, I've heard from some council members that there's an interest in having the Division of Housing Stability. I think there's so many ideas that our problem is now picking which one, to start with anyway. And so I've heard from some council members that there's an interest in looking at the Division of Housing Stability and maybe even broadening it to just the city's housing practices. And so maybe that's a starting point for the conversation. And then that way staff can see where the majority of the council is and work with the administration.
So the question is just confirming with the full council if that is a good starting point for, or a good, it's not starting point, we've done other audits, so a good next.
Next, please. Yeah.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
I have some thoughts. I think that's a good starting point. I think because of the Thriving in Place plan that we're going to get, or that we're working on, and all of the housing investments that we're doing, we just talked about the RDA and how we're going to invest money. I think it would give us a really good, this audit will give us a really good idea where we're at, things that we shouldn't be doing right now, but so that we can use some of those staff members to do other things that are in the Thriving in Place or the affordable homeownership, all of the things that we talk housing. So I feel excited, like audits to me are exciting in a way. Sometimes when we work in the business all day long, all of us staff, managers, mayors, council members, council staff, we're always working in the business, not on the business. So we need that separate, set of eyes that comes over and tells us, guys, I think you're spending too much time here where you should be spending here so that you can accomplish what you're trying to get, which is everything that we want, is to be more effective, be more impactful, be better with our dollars where we're spending it, and how we, do things at the city that every year I feel like we should be a little bit faster, a bit more efficient, a little bit more in tune with, how the business world works and how the world moves, that sometimes a little bit faster than what we do as a city government. So having that said, I'm okay with this. I think it's a good direction, and we'll see a lot of things that we could improve on, and I'm excited so that we can get stuff done. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Councilmember Valdemoros.
Just one note.
You're good.
How many audits can we handle at a time, and how many do you think, and how long does an actual audit take to do that?
If it's bad news, I'll say it.
Exactly.
Thanks, Cindy.
Doing one audit at a time is traditionally what we have succeeded at, because it does take an analyst. It's an ebb and flow that involves our office, and we work typically jointly with the mayor's office is how the council policy is written. So one at a time is pretty much all we can do. We did try to do 3 at one point. So as we ramp up, there may be opportunities to do more than 1 at a time, but for now I wouldn't want to commit to any more than 1 at a time.
And I'll add, I think it also depends on the administrative bandwidth and the scope of the audit as it relates to the administration. So for example, if, all 3 audits involved tangentially one department, that may be too much for that department. And so that's why we typically work with the administration to figure out, their bandwidth along with ours.
And also, how about now that we're incorporating the ERP program into different departments and we're kind of phasing those in, the audits with the ERP program, because I know that takes a lot of staff time just transitioning to the ERP program, and it would also change maybe the audit, how an audit is conducted also.
I think that, I don't know if Mary Beth's still here, she's probably listening. I think it's accurate to say that once the ERP system is fully operating and running, it may be easier to do department audits in the future because data will be much easier to pull and mine and things like that. It won't take as much staff to pull the information as it currently does. But I think we're a good year away from, if not more, from staff that's working on the ERP right now being freed up to do their normal jobs. Oh, there's Mary Beth. She's
Hi. Yeah, I would say that to create that historical trend and get the areas that you all want to focus on being projects and programs, it's going to take us a good year to get the data in order for us to complete an audit. We will have the historical data in a data warehouse, but that's not going to do you a lot of good. Within the next year, though, we should have some really good data.
Okay, so back on the ERP program and audit, so if those same people have to be doing both of them, we just need to be cognizant of the fact that if we're asking for an audit and at the same time they're transitioning to an ERP program, it might behoove us not to burden them with both of those
Right.
workloads at the same time.
I think, not to put Mary Beth on the spot again, but like, for example, if an audit of the finance department was on the table, I think that might be bad timing, just from a staffing perspective. And so, we'll definitely stay in touch with we'll work with the mayor's office on a scope. And typically we would do kind of a collaborative scope to make sure that whatever data we're getting is data that also they can use in their own management of departments. And so, yeah.
Councilmember Petro?
To go along with that, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. In order for an audit to be done, it does require not insignificant staff time to be devoted to it, to find it. And so I'd like us to consider, this is not a fully fleshed out idea, but it's something that I think we should consider potentially in the departments where the audit is happening, maybe creating a seasonal employee position, someone who could supplement the normal function of the department during the audit season so they don't fall behind on their work while someone from the department is dedicated to actually responding to the audit and helping get it done in a timely manner. Again, it's not a fully formed idea and probably requires a lot of sandpaper on it, but I do acknowledge the burden to the departments, and while it is necessary, I don't want it to cause additional problems.
I have a quick question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like this is part of our mandate as a council, right? Like council has an oversight mandate. So I just want to state that I'm supportive of this. I think this is a great idea, but it's not because I think there's a big failure that I'm waiting to uncover this conspiracy. It's because we want to be as efficient and we want to have as broad of a reach as possible with as the best possible use of taxpayer dollars, but not because I just don't want people listening to think that there's like this conspiracy we're trying to uncover.
Right.
No, not at all. Yeah.
This is just part of our mandate.
Yeah.
Okay. I saw a comment somewhere over here. No, I didn't. Councilmember Pui?
Yes. So I guess, I understand we cannot audit the whole city. I mean, that's not what I want to do either. And to the point mentioned earlier, I am not looking, I'm not pushing for this or supporting this because I think there is something very fishy happening, because it isn't. But I do remember the briefed on the building services audit last year, and I'm still waiting for some answers on that and some responses to things found on that audit. So I wonder if there is a way also to, when we're discussing about auditing departments, if there is some sort of, I don't know if you can do this, but a timeline for solving some of the issues. And then we'll have to come back to this council to decide where those issues we really want to solve from the audit. But I don't know if all of those might as well, maybe all of those have been addressed, but maybe for a failure from me, I haven't kept up with it, maybe.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Councilmember Pui. Can we get just a quick timeline on that? Because that actually was far more than a year ago that the audit took place, right?
Yeah, and I can tell you a little quick bit about it, and then we'll work with the administration on it. But it's a division of CAN, Community and Neighborhoods, and they have been so busy with issuing permits and evaluating buildings and all of that, that they were really unable to respond in a typical way. And so they did a lot of work, but then we had the auditors come back to do one more piece, which the council wanted, which was to measure. There was a different way to measure the amount of time that things are in the process, and to make that much more transparent for the public and the administration and the council. They told us just straight up, we don't have the capacity to do this right now. During the last budget, you did add some more staff to that division, but it was not enough to create the capacity to respond to the audit as well as to continue to issue the building permits. So
Well,
that might be
I think
something you want to look
This
at.
might be where Councilmember Petro's suggestion comes into place. Yes, every department is probably operating, not every, but like probably a lot of the departments are operating at capacity. So adding this, however, I think with the building services one specifically, as someone that works in the building industry and talks to people that work in the building industry, I think there are certain things that that audit was started before I was on the council, right? Like this is an old audit. This is not something that I came up with, but I think the goal of that was to create efficiency in that department, which would then free up a lot of those staff members, because there's processes that feel more complicated than they need to be. And I think that was kind of the point. So yes, but it's a chicken and egg problem where there's maybe not enough staff to fix the problem, but the reason why there's not enough staff is because the problem exists. So I do think it's important for us to not just audit and say, oh, well, here's all the things that we learned, but you don't have enough time to change anything, so we'll move on to the next thing. I think it's important for us to figure out how to implement some of those changes. And maybe that's what Councilman Petro is saying about we need to temporarily, seasonally augment the staffing in a department to help them implement changes. I'm not sure, but I do think there are places where the goal is to create efficiency and to solve structural process-related problems that either are real or maybe just perceived by the public. Either way, we want to figure out if it's a problem, and if it is, we want to address it. And it feels like that audit hasn't been as impactful in the way that things are happening than some may have hoped.
Right. Yes. And I think one way we can say, to characterize what Councilmember Petro's suggestion is we can say to the administration, what would be helpful to you to allow you to have the time to gather the information or free up your people, because it could be any number of things. And so we could just work with them to say, the council is willing to add resources. Can you tell us a little more about what would help give you the capacity to respond? And then that way we can make some progress.
So in terms, and I know Councilor Dugan's question was answered with, we really can only do one at a time, but can we do a follow-up to one and start another one at the same time?
Yes.
So what I'm hearing from council members is that we don't want to let that one audit that we've already done result in nothing. So dust that off, figure out what we can do to implement that, but then also move forward with, it sounded like the suggestion was housing stability as the next place where we want to just take a look at. Is that sentiment shared by council members? I'm seeing all nods, so I think that is the direction. Is that
Yep.
clear
So
enough?
So staff will work on a scope and review it with the administration and the council and make sure that it's kind of what the council's hoping for, and then we shop it with our firms that are on contract, and we go from there.
And I think this is important because I will say we're not like the worst city, but we are a city that has a ton of growth. So these two divisions are so important and critical to our current state and goals as the city, that I think it's important that that those two are well-oiled machines. And it's not about reducing capacity or cutting anything. It's about making the impact even greater that those two divisions are already doing.
And a lot of times it'll be that they are lacking tools, and once the council understands
we can give them
in
the tools.
detail, then you can,
Give them the tools.
I just want, sorry, I realized I didn't answer one other question. Councilmember Dugan asked about how long it typically takes. And I think this is the other piece where it's just frustrating, but it's just the reality is that it's at least 6 months from the development of the scope to, and that's abbreviated because we have consultants already on contract. We don't have to go to an RFP, but that's just the reality. Just based on ones I've seen.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, council members, are we good to move on to item number 7? Okay, item number 7 is an ordinance about early notification text amendment. This is a follow-up. This has been kicking around for years. So we have Nick Tarbett, council policy analyst, at the table. We also have John Anderson and Nick Norris from the planning division.
Define years, right? Is that?
Well,
It's
almost.
So
The first
we-
briefing was my first month
Yeah.
on the council.
Yep.
So
Well, ironically, this was started as a streamlining project, so I've made that joke before, but it was like 3 years ago, so it's funnier now, so.
So it's new. Okay, I'll give a quick introduction and then turn the time over to planning staff to, we're going to treat this as a new briefing effectively since so much time has gone by. So this is a proposal that would change Title 21A, the zoning ordinance, and Title 2, Chapter 2.60, the Recognized Community Organization Ordinance relating to early notification of the public and recognized community organizations for land use projects. This petition would move all of the planning and zoning related issues out of 2.60 and put them into 21A. There's a few outstanding policy questions that previous councils have gone over that we will ask the council members to help provide direction on. But before we get to that, John will give an overview of the issue.
Yeah, thanks. I did have a couple slides, but we'll make this quick. I know we're getting to the end of our meeting here. You can skip to the next one. So this is really, one, thanks for having us back again. But this is an effort to streamline and improve our early engagement process. This is, and by streamline doesn't mean shrink. If anything, we're adding steps to what we're doing. Currently, the early engagement code requires a certain types of planning and city initiative projects go through the early engagement process, which is generally a 45-day period of time, allowing the public and recognized community organizations, which are mostly community councils, but not exclusively, to gather feedback. It also requires an open house be held whenever we're near the boundary of multiple community councils, projects are located west of 2200 West, or there's a zoning text amendment. And the current ordinance does not allow a public hearing to be held during that period of time. So, next slide, please. So this is the proposed changes in response to kind of what we've learned. And a lot of this we were actually already doing. And we've learned a lot from COVID and finding more creative ways to engage with the public. So the first thing it would require is that early engagement would not be required for design review and new construction in historic district. Those petitions prior were not subject to that. It would require an initial public mailing to property owners and residents within 300 feet and a sign will be posted on the property when the application is submitted. And this is one of the things I think that has been really helpful for us because we're realizing that if we can identify problems at the very beginning of a project, it is a lot easier than when somebody gets a notice 10 days before a public hearing and points out a pretty obvious issue, right? So this would also require that the applicants post the property as required by state code rather than city staff. So that would add, we would manage that and supervise that and make sure they help with tools, but that would help obviously with staff's time. This is probably the biggest change, but it allows for an outreach event that does not need to be an in-person open house, and it could be held online through social media or other events. In the past, we used to hold a monthly open house up on the 4th floor, and all the planners involved would get a table and chairs, and we'd be lucky to get 5 people, 10 people in a project. And if you did get a lot of people, you can imagine in that hallway with 30 angry people, it wasn't a very effective way to really engage with people. Now that we've been moved most of our open houses online, we're seeing actually like hundreds of clicks on different projects. This would also create a requirement for the recognized community organizations to respond to staff within 14 days about a future meeting, or we're going to hold an outreach event in that place. It also would allow for a public hearing during the 45-day period, but no decision could be made. So there are some times when you have complex projects, it would be nice to get it before the Planning Commission or Landmark Commission's eyes prior to that 45-day deadline. So
one thing that I just want to add real quick before we move to the next slide, under that second bullet, the notice to property owners, right now our code currently doesn't require that for the early engagement process. The only required notice for early engagement is to a recognized organization. And so historically, neighbors only found out if the community council actually went out and flyered the neighborhood or knocked on doors, or if the city sent a notice to them informing them of the proposal, which is something we've been doing now for about 8 years, outside, even as an addition to that early engagement process. So this codifies that so that it becomes a requirement.
Thanks, Nick.
I'm sorry, about on the last bullet. I think I remember former council member Andrew Johnson talked about no public hearing for the first 14 days so we could get the message out.
So that wasn't that was added to the code or to the proposal.
Okay,
that would,
thanks.
And a public hearing has a minimum noticing requirements anyway, that of 12 days, so we'd have to follow that as well.
I have a question. So this means, can we break that down? If a recognized community organization, so if a community council responds within 14 days and says, yes, come to my meeting and present this, then the city does not do an open house or an outreach event?
So
Unless it's in the border?
We will still post that information so that it's available for people at their convenience. But the primary engagement activity will be at that recognized organization event.
Will that posting or that virtual open house or whatever we're doing be like watered down if a community council?
No, it's we're producing the same information regardless. And so one is, the biggest difference is that at the community council or recognized organization, the presentation really is up to the applicant to make. It's not up to the planning staff. We don't make those presentations. We're there to help answer questions about rules that apply and process and what's next. But it's really up to the applicant to do that.
And is it within staff's capability to basically do this online open house, whatever we're calling it, for pretty much all of the requests that come through? It sounds like we're doing it for all
like
of them.
I've been saying, that's something that we had to adjust to when we, during COVID, and we're all used to it now. And so it's become really easy for us from a staff resource allocation and production.
I appreciate that. I think it's important that that the community councils aren't the only way that information is getting out, because I do think there's concerns about who actually has the time to show up to community council meeting, and it's often not the people that are impacted the most.
And I think having that 14 days will help with staff time. Some community councils and organizations are very responsive. There are some that you'll hear from the next day, and there's some you never hear from. And so if you're waiting through that whole 45-day period to hear back, do you want me on an agenda? I think it's frustrating for us and for applicants at the very last minute said, well, it's day 40 and we want to hold a community council meeting we want you to attend.
In 2 days.
It does happen at times. We appreciate our community councils, of course. But, there is one last slide. It just kind of goes through a flow chart. I don't know if you want me to go through all this. I know we're reaching the end of this meeting, and I know that Nick Tarbett wants to go through some policy questions, but.
I do not want to go through the flow chart, but does anyone want to go through that?
I didn't think so, but I thought it's nice to help understand that there are multiple steps to this.
Intimidating.
And again, reiterating, we're actually doing more than we're legally obligated to, and we want to do that. So,
why don't we go to the policy questions? Unless there's something on the flow chart you really want to talk about.
No.
Yeah, but one of the big streamlining things that this does do that I wanted to touch on, and John did too, is that this puts the requirement for all posting of properties on the applicant, and they need to verify to us that they've done that. That's a significant staff resource savings.
So, because we had this happen very recently in the case that someone's like, I didn't get my postcard, or the sign fell down, or whatever. How do we verify that is or is not true? And
so the applicant needs, the proposed ordinance includes 2 different means that the applicant can verify with us that the sign has been posted to meet the ordinance requirements. So we would provide the actual template for them to use.
And there
with
is
all
a
the meeting
process
information. We'll do that in advance of their deadline to post it, and then they will have to post that.
Okay, and if there was some error and it may have happened, then we would do what we just did, and we would say, okay, let's hold another thing in another public hearing.
Right, and that is not as significant of an issue with the 45-day period, because it's really easy to, kick that another week if we have to because of some error.
Got it.
Because we usually can't get it on a planning commission or landmarks commission agenda in that short of a time frame anyway. So we have some flexibility. It's a different story when it is for a public hearing. We want to make sure that we get that right
Okay.
so that we're minimizing errors as much as we possibly can.
And we would continue to do mailed notices would come from our office. And so we do produce those mailing lists.
Is that a
and so-
pretty automated
Yes,
process
it
at
is.
this
It's
point?
super fast,
Okay.
yeah.
It's not like you have to go to the county recorder and print off sticky
No.
labels. I've had to do
No,
that before.
everything is, you select the properties, you hit print, it prints, we drop in the mail.
Got it.
So.
Okay, let's go through the policy questions.
Okay. So they are listed on pages 2 through 3 of the staff report if you want to look to there. I do just want to mention real quickly, Councilmember Dugan, you mentioned that question about Andrew Johnson, Councilmember Johnson's request. The pages 3 through 5 include all the changes the previous council had requested. They're highlighted in red, so you can see them there if you have any questions about those specifically. So the first one is, as we mentioned, what this is really doing is taking the land use, the planning items out of 2.60 and putting them into 21A. And then a few will remain in 2.60. The difficulty is that it called for, the existing list required a few things that the city, it was difficult for the city to be able to provide early notification for. One example is it called for any code changes. A budget amendment is a code change, and so we would have to go through the 45-day process for that. And so because that was so cumbersome and that's not been the policy of the city, we are looking for ways to change that. We've come up in talking with council members and staff, there's a list of 4 items that we've changed the language to that we still don't have complete certainty on that the council's okay with it or the way that you'd like to use that. So what we've kind of presented are 2 options. One is for this list to just stay in 2.60. It's pretty general, and then just hope that all the other departments and divisions will abide by that. They could lean on planning for some advice on how to incorporate this stuff. The other option is to request that the city departments and divisions review these and then come up with early notification policy that could be submitted back to the council within a certain amount of time so that you are comfortable with the process that they're going to be going through the early notification.
Okay, these 2 options are listed on
Page 2, right, is where it's at.
page 2 of the council staff report.
Yeah.
I see.
So the main list, I guess the amended language that we have is where we say city code amendments that change ordinances related to obtaining a permit or licenses by the city, major changes to street capacity or travel modes, including but not limited to changes to the transportation master plan, major upgrades or changes to a public facility or structure's function, access, and purpose, and or amending an adopted master plan and new construction of major public facilities and structures.
Those are the 4 things that would remain in 2.60 and be required for any division department that is working on one of those 4 things.
Yes.
And if I remember, there was like a problem of there's some community organizations that don't have boundaries, so they're technically citywide. So are they getting a notice for everything? Have we cleaned that up?
I don't know if we've cleaned that up or not. I think we still have some. We also have some that have overlapping boundaries. For example, there's 2 with the exact same boundaries in the avenues right now. So what that is doing is essentially saying they meet that requirement for having 2 that are within the close proximity of a boundary, and they're getting that notice.
We just do a open house.
Now, our practice is to try to accommodate that as best we can, but it really is based on staff availability to attend those when we do have that situation. Some are really good. For example, Ballpark and Central Ninth are really good about holding joint meetings, and other community councils that do that as well. But the code doesn't necessarily address or prohibit overlapping boundaries.
Okay. That's a question we should consider at a future time.
So I guess the question is the council supportive of having that language left in 2.60 and trust that the other departments and divisions will follow that? Or do you want to request some type of I don't say a report, but a request that they come back within a certain amount of time to provide the policy of how they plan to incorporate
I would
this.
prefer not to have to change this ordinance within every single division, but that's me. We can keep it in 2.60. Am I not understanding the question right?
I think, no, maybe I'm not asking it correct. That's probably the,
I don't know if the intent is for each department to come up with policies and procedures that are adopted. I think the intent is to say, hey, council, here's our policies and procedures with how it aligns with 2.60 and what we're required to do. I think that was where we were going with that. But so that there's something in writing so that they have something, especially for those departments that do public engagement already, parks, transportation, they're already doing a lot of this stuff. Public utilities does a lot of it too. And so I don't know that it's every department is going to have to do something, but those that do have projects that are impacted by 2.60 now would have more clarity on when what the requirement is, and then they can come up with policies and procedures. I think it's mostly just to inform the council about that versus having them adopted. Ours, we think, are quite a bit different because we have such a regulatory role that it makes sense for ours to be fully adopted.
Within 21A.
And I think it'll help. Some of the language is a bit ambiguous when it talks about major street projects or major this. And I think it would be easier for transportation or public utilities to be able to define what that means. Because, what's major to me is going to be very different than major on a city-wide scale.
That's fair. The one I have a question on is city code amendments that change ordinances related to obtaining a permit or licenses. What does that mean? Like a business license?
Yeah, it could be. That was one of those changes that we came up with to address every code amendment requiring it. And so one of the areas where we landed was to try to get those things that impact or that require somebody, the end result requires somebody to do something. Like they need to get a permit from the city. We should be giving them people notice on what changes are occurring to that, whether it's business licensing or a right-of-way permit or something like that. So that was kind of the intent of that section.
Would it be, what would be the negative of just like taking that one out? It feels a little unclear to me. Like, are we talking about like a special event permit?
It's only for code changes related to those, right? Okay.
If we're rewriting the licensing code and we do that in a vacuum and then people who are subject to getting those licenses are upset later, it helps if there's some base level of engagement so that key organizations
Recently,
are
we've talked a
informed.
lot about business licensing for rental properties and if we can have some additional steps in there and things like that. So is that an example of something that would be a code change related to getting a license?
That's
then
right.
who do we give early engagement to? Anyone that has a business license in the city?
Well, I think if it's just about apartment licensing, you would start with any association that relates to apartments or any association or nonprofit that relates to renters' rights, and then all of the people who are currently licensed.
That's right. And that's a current practice that we do. Okay. So if we're doing a text amendment that, for example, the one that just pops in my mind is, a couple years ago we made changes to like the brewery regulations. All of those entities, known entities, we reached out to. We try to track down as many as we can and send them a big broad email. Say, hey, we're considering these proposals. We want you to weigh in on this. And so it's a current practice. At least for us, it's probably not for a lot of other departments.
Okay. Yeah.
The question that Nick was asking about how to get the other departments aware and focused in this area, I think all of them have made great strides. And one thing we could do is just perhaps amend the council reporting ordinance or the other ordinance about master plans so that it's specific on what it is they're reporting on. That would be a shorter process than going in and trying to ask them all to make process changes and policies. If we just laid out, these are the things that we would like you to report on, then it might get us there quickly.
I guess are there any council members that really want to go with this option number 2 where we like to me it sounds like we're going to be spending a whole bunch of agenda time, and when it's like sounds like we're really already doing a pretty good job. I'm in favor of going with option 1 on the staff report.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, the least amount of things that we have on an agenda, the better I feel.
So let's not do that.
Okay, that sounded like a
Is that
unanimous.
a fair answer? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the second policy question is we wanted to highlight mainly that there are some exemptions being listed at this time. Previously, there were not. Those are identified on page 2 through 3. One item that we've added since is based off of, I'll just read it to you real quick. It says, any land use project where an existing federal or state law or regulation sets a deadline which requires a decision or action which would place the requirements of this chapter in direct conflict with state or federal law. So sometimes there'll be a state law or federal law come down that says the city has to do something with X amount of time, and the early notification process would not enable us to get that done in time. So
That makes sense to me, yeah. Let's go for it.
okay. Those are the two main ones. The third one, staff, we were talking about today is the potential of adding some additional comments into the whereas clauses of the adopting ordinance that would help commit the city to increasing our capacity for outreach to the communities. To some of the language we would send to you for consideration, it would be to facilitate and provide funding for innovative approaches to obtaining input from all sectors of the community with an enhanced emphasis on communities that have historically been underrepresented. So it's not going to be requiring the city to do anything per se outside of saying, here's some of our goals, here's some of our priorities. We would like this ordinance to be able to make those things happen. Okay. Who would say no to that? Thank you. So with that, I think we have the direction we need.
All right.
Thank you.
So what's our plan for?
I think the next steps is, since it's been a while, we would have another public hearing on it. And then we will make these changes, have them incorporated, and then the council can adopt that after that.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's get it done.
Thank you. We will.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thanks for your patience on this one.
All right. Okay, so we have a dinner break, and we have a closed session I think we were going to do after the formal. We have a limited formal where we're just doing that one with the Youth Resource Center. Can we do the closed session now?
Yes.
It's like a...
Your limited formal is not time, we're not in, it is 7. Oh, it's after
It cannot be
7.
before 7.
Oh, that's too bad, okay.
Well, I was...
Okay, so you can do the closed session right now.
Is dinner
Get your
ready?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn this work session and, oh no, not adjourn, I'm sorry. Brain. I move that we go into a closed session for purposes of
Security.
discussion regarding deployment of security personnel, devices, or systems, and attorney-client matters.
Second.
Okay, wait, hold on. Did you have any announcements? Okay, we skipped announcement. I have no. Okay, great. So I have a motion from Councilmember Fowler, a second from Councilmember Dugan. Any discussion on this motion? I have to roll call, right? I will roll call Councilmember Pui.
Yes.
Fowler.
Yes.
Petro.
Yes.
Valdemoros is absent. Dugan.
Yes.
Wharton.
Yes, is there a separate link?
Nope, staying that link. And I'm a yes, so that passes 6-0 with Councilmember Valdemoros absent. And we are getting dinner. We are going to closed session, and we will not come back to work session. We're going to reconvene at or close to 7 p.m. in our limited formal meeting.
All correct.